Welcome to the Backslider Diaries, a podcast about breaking out, not looking back, and calling it like it is. We grew up deep in the cultish world of Pentecostalism, revivals, purity culture, tongues, trauma, and everything in between. Now we're sharing the stories they never wanted us to tell. I'm your host, T.
And I'm Jay.
This is where healing, humor, and heresy meet. Let's get into it. Alright, so first of all, after last week, or yesterday, whatever day, whatever it was, there were a couple of things I wanted to clear up a little bit, I guess. I guess when I was talking, I thought I said things, but actually I just thought them. They didn't
Right.
actually come out of my mouth when I listened back to it. So one of the things I was trying to say is when I was leaving, one of the things that was hard is not just that my whole family was in the church, but they were all pretty much preachers, either a preacher or had something to do with the music or something. So my cousins, my uncle, my dad, my grandparents, everybody was a preacher. Big old family full of preachers.
And all of our family, friends, and associates too.
Well,
Like,
yeah, I mean, we were
that was the
deep
whole world. Yeah.
deep in the cult. So that's why when I left, I never have asked you, and maybe we'll bring it up a little bit later, but I never did ask you, what everybody thought about that when I left. I've never really actually cared, and I mean, I assumed. But anyway, we'll get to that in a bit. I guess there was maybe only one thing I wanted to clear up. Oh yeah, and the name. We said the name wrong last time. It's the Backslider Diaries. So we're new. Screw it.
That's right.
So I thought yesterday when we last talked, we were going to try to tell our stories, and I think we did a good job of jumping around a whole lot and not really
Yeah.
focusing. So what I would like to do, because your story is a lot better than mine, I think, since I left so early, and what I'd like to do today is just hear kind of your side, because one of the other things is we are two totally different people in the way that we think, and we talked about this
Right.
today because you're the kind of person who, if you wanted to do something, you're going to go ask for permission to do it and tell somebody that you want to go do something that you know that they probably don't want you to do. Like, I'm going to go to a party, mom and dad, and you know they're going to say no, but you're going to ask them. And I was totally the opposite. I will go and
Forgiveness later
yeah,
and permission.
yeah, right. Well, I wasn't going to say that. My wife hates that saying, so I wasn't going to
Yeah.
say that. But
Most wives do.
yeah, no, but I mean, if I wanted to go do something, I would just go do it. I'm not going to tell somebody I'm going to go do it. I mean, you don't
Right.
tell the enemy that you're going to attack. But anyway, so we have two different ways that we approach things. So for me, when I left, it's not like I wouldn't ask permission. I just didn't show up one day.
Right.
But with you, it was a little bit different, and also you had I don't know, I guess a different perspective because I think with the music and everything that you were involved
Mm-hmm.
in, that was kind of more of your identity. And to
Yeah.
me, like, I mean, I played the drums and stuff, but you know what? I was like, it's really not worth it. I love it, and it really makes me sad, but that I stopped doing that. But anyway, let's talk about you. So first of all, why did you decide, or what was the impetus for you? Because you were really deep into it. I mean, you were.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you, but
No, go ahead.
yeah, just to jump in with a little bit of backstory. I won't go too far in the weeds, but it's relevant. So, I think largely we talked about this, we a lot in our lives, our difference in approach and personalities. And you are a few years older than me, and that's a factor. And also the idea of just, and we can talk about this, like we say, we can talk about this later. The idea of justice is really important to me. And so it wasn't just that I wanted to do the thing or go to the party or whatever. It's that there was no reason why I shouldn't be able to. And for some reason, I felt it was my God given responsibility to educate everyone on those facts, much to my demise many times.
Yeah.
But because one thing that I did come out of it though with, and if you hear this phrase and it applies to your life, feel free to own it because it has been so liberating to me. You can't logic someone out of a belief they didn't logic themselves into, and that just would apply to many of the battles that I fought in my life. It's a losing battle when you're trying to kind of unhook someone's ideas of belief that are
Yeah.
rooted just in the belief. Like, where do you go from there?
I like
But
to say you can't argue with crazy.
well, that'll work.
You know,
That'll work too. Either
tomato,
way.
tomato.
So I think that my experience was different in large part, being female.
Yeah.
I actually read a post on Reddit today, and it was talking about, people that grew up in evangelical world and kind of that sort of religion. What were the role models as far as careers for women? And, it's something that I joke about a lot with my husband now is the game plan for me was marry a youth pastor.
Oh
Like,
dear God.
yeah, like that, and not my game plan, but like what was laid out before me, was to be a preacher's wife. And I didn't want to be a preacher's wife. I wanted to study science. And, eventually I did go on to study science to some degree, but that was just such a big part of it. And the only women who had quote unquote careers that I even knew about were, I guess, teachers maybe, and those were teachers in private Christian schools, and the word teacher there is being used very flexibly.
Heavy lifting for that word, right?
Yeah, right. And I knew a couple of nurses, but that was really it. And I think that that was a big part of laying the groundwork of what could be expected, and not to get too heavy with it, but I most of the women that I knew and observed were in some form of unhealthy relationship dynamic, and observing that feeling of stuckness and sort of like you have to make of life what you get, sort of. You don't really have the opportunities to go forward and just change your life and do things. You sort of, this is what you get and you make the best of it, and that was a big part of it. There was also a lot of fear put into me in the realm of purity culture, that women who went off and on their own into the world and did things like they were never going to be. Our mother used to tell me, like, if you fall away from purity culture, no man will ever love you. That's not true, by the way, but I thought it was at the time. And there are things that we say, there are beliefs that are taught and beliefs that are caught. And I think oftentimes a lot of the things that really inform our lives are the things that are caught and not so much overtly said. And that idea that my role was to be a helpmate, my role was to be a support system. I never felt comfortable with that. That was never what I wanted. It just took me a minute to kind of wrap my head around another way of living. And I think something that's really pivotal to that, and sometimes I forget, how you forget things about your own life, and then when you're telling it, you're like, oh yeah, well, that was weird. And I think I, especially out of the two of us as siblings, I lived in such a closed world system because, when you were younger, and I'm talking like school age, kindergarten age, you got to go to public school for the first few years.
Right, right,
And because our father liked sports, you got to play sports a lot. And,
right. I had an outlet.
you
I
you
got to see,
had.
I had a glance at the real world.
Exactly, exactly. And being a boy, you were allowed to go around and ride your bike more freely or go to
Well,
friends' houses.
and back then too, I mean, I really kind of fit in more because I could wear jeans. I could,
That's what I was going to say.
that
Yeah.
sort of thing. I couldn't wear shorts, God forbid, somebody saw my leg, but
Growing up in that, kind of having those ideas around me, and all of those things, you find yourself kind of being shuttled into young marriage. And I was starting to go to college, and I met a man through church that was older than myself, and he was 10 years older than me. And I think I had been in such a closed, controlled world for so long. And that's what I was going to say just really briefly is I never went to public school up until well past middle school, or late elementary school. But, for many, many years, my whole world was simply people I knew at church, our family, and maybe some other visiting church people from afar. Like, that was really the world I knew. So I just didn't see any other ways of doing life. And as I got a little older and started going to college and things like that, I didn't feel comfortable with the freedom of my own life because I had never been given any freedom over any of my life. So all of a sudden, the idea that like I could just jump out there and be free and make my own decisions and all that kind of stuff felt a little overwhelming, even though I consider myself to be fairly independent. And when I met this man, and he was 10 years older than me, and my family knew his family through church relationships, it felt like, okay, well, here's, somebody who is a grown up, who knows how things are supposed to go. I actually wound up being in a very controlling abusive relationship for 17 years. When I finally left the church, because during that relationship, we were very active members in the faith. And in a way, I guess I was playing out the continuation of hypocrisy and systems of abuse that I was familiar with. There's a good old therapy saying that says we don't seek to create what's good for us, we create what's familiar to us. And I think I definitely did that. We came out of some pretty complicated situations in our childhood. And I sort of recreated that for myself without realizing what I had done. And I did, as you were saying, I did become that, Christian housewife who was volunteering at the church 20 hours a week and working in a Christian school and taking my kids to all the things and,
Bows in the
speaking at the
hair.
women's conferences. Yeah, putting bows in my kids' hair and speaking at conferences. And I became very, very, very involved with the music end of things and wound up, doing a lot of recordings and being on a worship team the band was excellent. I have to say, the music was phenomenal. And I loved the music of it. I mean, you know me, music is truly my first language. I was grown to fruition in my mother's womb, as it were, with her playing a Hammond B3 organ 3 or 4 times a week and singing, and that's just in my DNA, it's in my blood. I could sing harmony before I could read. That enmeshment, I really think of the music and the feelings that I would feel when engaging in the music. That was my only emotional outlet and the only place I truly felt safe and that I had a space for myself, and I think that became entangled along the way with me pushing to the back of my mind a lot of the questions that I had about things. And I sort of was so good at that point due to extenuating circumstances in my childhood and then later my adulthood. Through abuse, you become really good at dissociation. And I was really a pro at compartmentalizing like my rational science thinking. I mean, I have a master's of science in cognitive neuropsychology. I enjoy science and I would read things and question things in scientific literature that didn't really line up with things that were in the religion. And so all of those things, like I held in half of my brain and then the other half of my brain was the part of me that was engaged in the religious aspect. And it's really performing the religion. It really is. I believed I had a personal relationship, but a lot of it was very performative. And I'm getting to the reason of how I left. So I promise I am it. The story matters. It does. There's context here. As I was coming to the end of that marriage, at the same time, I was very, very active in leadership in a large church that was tangentially associated with, like the big mega churches, the Osteen group and Hillsong and like all those kind of folks. And the deeper I got into it, it was kind of like a parallel. Like you see in a movie, as my marriage continued to unravel and I started having to really find a place of strength in me because it was really like we're at a sink or swim situation,
Well,
you
let's
know.
sell it like it is. It wasn't that your marriage had unraveled. It's just that you were finally sick of the shit.
Well, it got to the point where it was either like I have to leave or I'm not going to be able to leave at some point. We'll just leave it at
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah.
And and I had 2 kids in tow. But that plays into it as well because I think, well, why didn't I leave the marriage before? Well, I can tell you why. Nobody in my family had ever gotten a divorce that I ever knew of, ever. I had no reason to think like, okay, you can do this. This is feasible. You can make this work. And every time I would go to my pastors or go to the Christian counselors that they'd refer us to, or we'd be in a Celebrate Recovery group or whatever the resource was that I was going to looking for help, what I was always told was, you need to be more submissive. How are you responding as a wife? I was given the book, He Craves Respect, She Wants Love. I can't even remember the names of it now. The love languages. Like I was given all of these band-aids for what essentially was a beheading. And, there was some rough issues there. And uh, I wasn't hearing any voice of, hey, you can leave. Like that's okay. And not that you need a voice to tell you what's right or wrong. I was a full-grown adult, I could make my own decisions. But it just took me a lot longer to kind of build that escape route for myself. And having had a lifetime of having men in power tell me who I was and what I was able to do, there's an coercive control is the word I'm looking for. And I think that when you're in that relationship with religion growing up, it's very easy for that to transfer into abusive relationships as an adult.
Well, and I think also if you're in a relationship and you're both good church-going people and you're there every Sunday and the abuser, puts on this totally different
Yeah.
face, and then it's just your word against his at that point. And a lot of
Well,
people, unfortunately, take the abuser's side because
yeah.
they're a sociopath or a narcissist, and they're able to put on these facades for other people. And what a great place to hide behind, all I got to do is go to church every Sunday and smile. It's a
Well,
great
let me
place
take it
for
one
those
step
people
deeper.
to hide.
Let me take it one step deeper. It's not just that other people look at that person and think that. You get so brainwashed that you look at how the person performs their
Right.
identity, and
Right. They
then
can't
you
be that
think
bad. Look how they
you're
are.
crazy.
Yeah. What am I
Exactly.
doing wrong?
Everybody at
He
the
treats
church
everybody else
loves
great.
them. Right. Everybody at work is saying they're the kindest, most supportive, would never say or do anything disrespectful. And yet, the reality of what you're living with, which, P.S., that sounds a lot like our childhood, doesn't it? So,
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot
yeah,
of
right? Overlap.
oh,
Yeah,
it's kind of just a funny example is, you're yelling at the kids 1 minute and then the phone rings. You're like, "Hello." You
exactly.
know,
Exactly.
that sort of thing.
Right. And so it's the idea of I think there's a real component there of it wasn't like I had come from a healthy dynamic. And like I look at my youngest child now of my four, and I think of her with the love and support that she gets from her father and I. So my first husband, if you aren't aware, my first husband and I separated and he passed away. And then I actually later went back and found my first love, my first real boyfriend from when I was 16, 17 years old, and we got married and had two more children. I know, right? So sappy. No, I'm so lucky. He's the best. But, back to what I was saying, like when you truly grow up and you can't separate the misogyny from it when you're told as a woman overtly as well as covertly like we all are by the culture, but when you're overtly told in your home your place is to serve, you're the helpmate, you're not allowed to speak up, you need to be more submissive. And let me tell you, if I had a single penny for every single time in my life somebody has told me I need to be submissive in the church, in relationship context of that word,
Our
I
podcast
would
wouldn't sound so bad.
I would be a billionaire, truly.
Right.
No, and my own, yeah, it's a long story with that. But that's what's pushed onto you. So I had all of this in my head. I have this person who looks so good on the outside, and my life looked good on the outside,
Yeah.
but
I
it
came
was
and
very
visited you, and
dangerous.
you didn't,
Yeah.
you didn't let me know any of
Yep.
that stuff was going on, and I don't want to sound like macho guy, but I'm glad you didn't, because,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
one of us would have got hurt.
Right. And it was a really, really tough situation. And I would never wish that amount of mental duress on anybody. And to anybody, if you are listening and you're ever going through that, just know, like, if you feel like your brain is just absolutely scrambled, I get that because it's the most confusing time. And I'm doing all the things at the same time that this is all happening. So, like, I'm praying, I'm fasting, I'm feeling like what I felt like on the inside, to be 100% honest, was my doubts are impeding my faith, and that's why this recipe isn't working
Well,
because,
God's testing you, right? God's testing
right,
your faith. You're like
right.
Job.
No, you don't, dude. You don't know how many times I would read the book of Job, and I would also read the book of Ruth, and I would like reflect on what I should do and how like,
Back to that
no, I
victim
can't even tell
complex.
you. Yes, but there again, look back and reflect. Like there's so many things that mirror there from that type of environment of how many women did we know who just kind of like sucked it up and dealt with it. And the men were, I mean, God, how many men like they wouldn't provide, they wouldn't work, they were always just,
Oh, yeah, out
mean, they
fishing
were
all day.
yelling. Right, right.
Well,
And
that's
so,
what one thing just I saw those guys, sorry to interrupt you, but as a little
no, you're
kid,
fine.
As I said in an earlier podcast, I
Uh-huh.
read Louis L'Amour books all the time, and that's not what
Right.
cowboys did. When you were William Tell Sackett, you took
Mm-hmm.
care of things. You know, you took care of your family. And for
Right.
these guys to feign illness, I thought anyway,
Yeah. Right.
I
No,
just
for
I
sure.
had no respect for them, and for them then to be in the church, to be an elder in the church. That
Right.
just another thing to just the hypocrisy just like did not make sense to me.
No, exactly.
Anyway, go ahead.
No, but seriously, like that was the thing too. Like them sitting there saying, "Well, I'm the head of the house. I make all the decisions, but you go and work and provide for me and, XYZ."
Right.
Like it just there was a lot of that whole construct. Even though at this point in time, I had 2 degrees, I'd been working, I'd, traveled around the world to various places. Like I wouldn't consider myself naive. I would consider myself
A
very
sad,
like
brainwashed little girl. That's
yeah,
what
I
you
was going to
were.
say very immature with an understanding of my own empowerment, truly.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
though I'd taken the empowerment classes in college and like, done all the things and whatever. It's different when your lived experience is telling you the exact opposite every single day. So, as this was all happening and I'm sitting there going, "Okay, I'm praying, I'm doing the things, I'm fasting." He's, his condition, his situation is deteriorating and getting worse and worse. This is becoming a dangerous place. Every person I'm going to is telling me I'm doing it wrong. And I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do. And so I took my kids and left rather quickly from that situation. And as I was driving from the state where I lived at the time back to where my parents lived, and that was my plan at the time, is I'm just going to have to go there and, sit there for a
Suck
while.
it up.
Yeah.
You kind of
Y-
going from the frying pan into the,
To the
well, not
fire.
exactly the fire, but
Well, it
still.
was still pretty near the stove.
Right.
But no, but it was different. And I'm very grateful. I do have to say, I'm incredibly grateful that our parents opened their home to me. And, they really, in the best way that they could be, they were really there for me and tried to help me with
Yeah.
my own kids and give me an environment and a softer place to land and stay safe. And I mean, I'm incredibly grateful because I was absolutely shattered at that time. And then soon after that, we were in the separation process and he passed away unexpectedly. Excuse me a second.
Where were you on that day again?
I was actually in another state. Yeah, it's a long story. But so yeah, that happened. And, that was really another blow to my faith where I'm like, okay, it's not just about me and my actions and faith, but he really fervently would like just pray and cry and pray in tongues and read the Bible and do all these things because he wanted resolution for some issues that he was dealing with, that were contributing to our situation. And ultimately, after he passed away, something shifted in me. And, people I know I can hear the voices of former church mates who might be like, "Well, you're mad at God or you got hurt and so, that's your
You never
situation."
had a real relationship with
Right.
God to
And
begin
I
with.
beg to differ. I beg to differ because, I did the quiet times. I did the journals. I worked in Christian schools. That was my entire life.
Well,
You were there.
you're not the kind of person, I think maybe people could tell from our just conversation a little bit ago. You're not the kind of person who would get up in front of hundreds to, thousands of people and cry and raise your hands and do that unless you really didn't believe it.
Absolutely. No, authenticity is the only thing we have. And those things were very real for me. And I think in hindsight too, I have to say I did feel those feelings. Like that wasn't performance for me. And when I was singing and would feel that, that would happen. And you and I have talked about this, like one of the most confusing things for me because there's a lot of stuff I didn't do kind of like on the regular timeline of life. I had a lot of first experiences a lot older in my life just due to our upbringing. And the first time I went to a big concert, and I remember when I went and saw the Rolling Stones. And of course, I mean, it's the Stones, it's a great show. But like everybody's singing along in this whole stadium, and it's that good. There's a lot of Pentecostal music that sounds like a lot of like bluesy rock and roll if you listen squinted, but
Yeah, yeah.
something in it. Like they kind of broke out into a little kind of pseudo gospel-y blues song, and everybody was singing along. And I'm like, why do I feel like I'm gonna cry and like feel the spirit? And I have felt that feeling many times in music. There's, sometimes I'm listening to for me it's stuff that has that crossover point, like, Aretha Franklin music, or, Sam Cooke or Otis Redding, stuff like that. And I'll listen to it and man, it's like I feel it right there in my throat. I feel that just knot of emotion, and
Get chill
that
bumps, as we used to
yes,
say.
exactly, exactly. And, it was hard for me to kind of decipher what that was. And now I have a better handle on that. I'm like, well, that's
Being
the
human.
fact
That's a human.
that exactly right. I was going to say we're meant to have those collective experiences, and
Right.
music is so powerful. But at the time when I was getting ready to leave my first marriage, I'll tell you, this was really a pivotal moment. I was in working with this big mega church, doing their worship team and stuff. And
That's a subject for another time, but worship,
yeah,
that word, that could be a whole show right there.
it should be, and it will be. Let's come back to that. But I just kept getting this sense, like the phrase that kept running through my head was, if this is really the gospel, why does it need all the glitter? Like in the Bible, it says it's up to Christ that he'll draw men to him. And if he's lifted up, then, and that the Spirit gives the understanding and all
Well,
this stuff.
that reminds me, and this is a good place where I think you could have mentioned. You told me the other day that you had gone to rehearse for a church
Oh,
service.
I'll
Yeah,
tell you that story.
you gotta mention that because
Okay.
that's exactly, that fits in perfect.
So the pastor of the megachurch, his wife is a very well-known vocalist and made several albums and has a famous sibling in that world, and a lot of songwriting and music. And we made some great music, and she's a phenomenal vocalist. She's super nice. Nothing negative to say in that regard personally. But they were very, very interested in growing the church, and they'd become real devotees of also the prosperity gospel. And they were really wanting to be like the next big Mars Hill, or, Saddleback Church, or that kind of, which to you, you've been out of this world for a long time. So you're like, what even is that?
I just know about the prosperity gospel, and that's like
Yeah.
army intelligence. Those two words
Yeah.
don't go together.
They don't go together at all. Doing this big church thing, I'm doing the music. The music was phenomenal, and that's really what for me was the grounding place. That was the part that, despite all of my questions, all of my doubts, all of my science versus story kind of battles in my head, would boil down to the fact that when I was had my eyes closed and was in this music moment, that I truly felt something transformative. And
That was
it
really
was
the only way you could express yourself,
the only way. And, it felt profound. And to be, I think also it was like such a place of emotional release. I was living in a situation where it was very unsafe. We'll just say it like it is. It was very unsafe. And to be able to just be in a place and sort of cry and pour my heart out. And the idea is so intoxicating that, like, you can just leave it all on the altar. You can pour out all your pain, that it's not without a purpose, that it has somewhere to go,
right?
and that the pain is going to be transformed in your life,
When we all get to heaven.
Exactly. And that, there's going to be a redemption moment. I mean, God, that I remember standing on the stage singing this song called Redemption Song. And like those words for me weren't just words and music, they were calls and cries for help. And, that was a big part of it. But so I'm in this church, and, I've been going there for several years, and now I'm at, kind of a leadership position with the music and all these things. And we were preparing for a big event, and we'd had a sound check that afternoon. I think we were going to be recording in that particular thing. So we went, we had our sound check, everybody got it together. We got our set for the night nailed down. And as we were preparing to leave, one of the people on the like the high church leadership team, made the comment, don't forget, this is an outreach event. When you come back tonight, make sure you guys look sharp, make sure you look sexy. And
Jesus Christ.
and I was like, it just struck me wrong. And to be honest with you, it wasn't the first time I'd heard that sentiment. I mean, they were bringing in people to airbrush our makeup for us before church. We had coordinated out, we had a designer, not that would make our outfits, but that would, like, for each one of us, give us suggestions of here's the colors we're wearing for this day. This is what looks best on you. You need to wear this kind of an outfit. I mean, like, we had people telling us how to do our hair. There were HD cameras with like the big, big screens. You know, that was the pretense was, well, you need to look right because we're streaming this, we're recording this, this is being
Yeah, but
broadcast.
I
And,
understand that for TV. You want to, of course, you want to look good and you want to represent whatever you're representing. You want to look nice. You don't want to look like a bum,
right.
but
Sexy
sexy,
is different. Well, and I've thought about that a lot because given the context of the city where I was, at the time, it was so much part of the culture that it didn't register with me in the same way. I had some of those things that, like, it doesn't completely throw you off, but it stops you for a minute and you're like, what? And
double
so
take, yeah.
exactly. So I remember I went home, I got ready, I got my kids fed and ready to go back because, of course, the kids, had to go with me. And I will say they had excellent children's stuff and they were very good about security. So kudos for that. Something our childhood missed out on sorely. But as I was getting ready to leave, I put the kids in the car and my neighbor was like, "Ooh, girl, you look good. Are you going out to the club?" And I was like, "I'm going to church."
Clubbing for Jesus.
It just was so, it really, like, the veil slipped
Wow.
off.
Well, especially
And
the way we grew up, like that's
oh
like, I
God, it
mean,
was a 180.
yeah,
No, I wasn't even allowed to wear Vaseline on my lips as a child or as a
gee,
teenager. Like, no, it was such a 180, but
that turns men on, that Vaseline on your
I
lips.
know. Gotta have those chapped lips. But, it was just so weird. And so that really started what I look back on as my deconstruction. That was really the first place where I'm like, wait a minute, why w- the whole prosperity? It's like, and once the thread started to pull of the prosperity gospel and me realizing this is so transactional. Like, what's the point of having a relationship with a God if basically it's a tally of how much tithe I pay and
Right,
sort of like a slot machine, like insert coin here, pull prayer lever, get result. And like the
right.
whole idea, they preached a lot about you're favored of God. And I'm like, wait a minute. So are you telling me like the kid there in Africa dying of dysentery, are they not favored by God? How
Right.
does this
Yeah.
work? So I'm getting the great parking spot because, I'm God's favorite because I paid my tithes last week. So therefore I can find a parking spot at the grocery store.
Jesus is Republican. He didn't like brown people either.
No, well, here's the irony. We actually had this musician named Michael Gunger come and perform with us. And he actually has a song called White Republican Jesus. And I'm like, dude, I don't think you all know who you invited, who he actually wound up
Oh,
deconstructing from the faith as well. And get this, he went to the university, the music university in our hometown.
uh-huh.
That's where he went to
Oh wow.
school. Yeah,
A lot
small
of good
world.
people went there.
I know, right? So that really started the process. So then I left my marriage. My first husband passed away. I am now a 37-year-old widow with two kids who are very traumatized by the events that happened beforehand and then
Yeah.
his very abrupt passing. And I'm just sitting there going, I don't even know. Like, I've been very heavily brainwashed and controlled for a long time, and I don't even know what I'm doing. And so we moved, and that stopped the church going at the time. It just felt too raw. It felt too close to everything. And frankly, I was doubting everything. And one
Well, and
day,
luckily too, then our parents weren't. I wouldn't say weren't as involved in the church, but they didn't have their own church, so you weren't
right,
under any pressure to, go
right.
there and perform and, all
Right.
that.
And they'd still ask me, constantly to go to church with them, which I did a couple of times. And like, if I wasn't there, because I was living with them at the time with my kids. And, if I wasn't in town, if I was out of town working or something, they would take my kids, which my kids have their own stories to tell. And we should get them on here because they saw some things. But it's another story. I feel
A
horrible
lot
for them
worse
with
than
that.
just Fox News on all the time.
Yeah, right. Which is its own thing. But during that time, I think of really being free for the first time of number one, worrying about my safety and my children's safety kind of on the 24/7 level, and having that stress and starting to heal a little bit from that, or at least recognize the wound, starting to hear my own thoughts for the first time in a long time, not being told at church, at work, in my friendships constantly that, that this was the only way to think and be, and that this was the only solution to my just all of the whole system. It started to open up my mind, and to be honest with you too, I met some people who were the best Christians I'd ever met, who would never darken the door of a church, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Well, I think that's about the time you reached out to me too, and
yeah,
I started. I mean, we talked, but I started also pointing you to like some of the videos, like we discussed before, Matt Dillahunty, and
yeah.
I just really, it was nice to hear somebody that was actually really into it, like he was, who was an actual preacher,
Mm-hmm.
and the way he explains things, a lot more articulate than I am. It made so much sense, and he was able to put into words what I was thinking. Some of the phrases and things he said, it's just like, man,
Well,
I wish
it's
I could say that way.
in a weird way, it's like therapy. Like, one of the great things about therapy, besides just kind of unpacking things and having to say them out loud, is you get the language, which, we often malign it in our modern moment as therapy speak. But there's some value to like being in a place where somebody else is giving you the language to say the things you don't know how to say yet. And
Right.
that's what,
The first time I heard religious abuse,
right,
I
right.
was like, holy
What?
shit. Yeah, that's like,
That explains a lot.
wow,
Yeah.
that's me. And if you guys haven't heard about that, Google it. I won't go into it, but yeah, it's a thing. If
Or go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. Sorry.
it's a thing, and it's really a painful thing, and it's nice
Yeah,
to
it
be able
is.
to have somewhere you can talk about it or hear other people talk about their situation. And it's like you in your relationship, you think you're crazy. It's the same thing here. It's like,
Well, it's
you think like
validation.
you're the crazy one. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
totally.
No, it's
Sorry to
validation.
interrupt you.
It's no, 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 no. That's a great point, and I absolutely 100% agree. I had to get to a place where I could hear my own voice, not be afraid of that voice, and frankly, a place where I'd kind of lost so much in my life that it wasn't about carving things out. It was like looking at the rubble and deciding what fit and what could build it back. And like I said, I met some great people who did all the wrong things. They drank and said bad words and did this and that, but were the best Christians I've ever met, because they truly, like with their life, they were living the fruit of the Spirit. They were living kindness and forgiveness and long suffering and peace and joy and all these things. Whereas the people that were saying all the Bible words were living the exact opposite of that. And what I could see in their life, this is where, and maybe I did hear this on one of Matt Dillahunty's, I don't know, but it was around this time that the three questions came into my head. Right.
Okay.
And I'm
Yeah, I've
sure
been
I heard
curious about
this.
that. Yeah, what are your three questions?
Okay. This was really the moment for me, and I hope I can say it right and not get myself confused, because you know how it is. But it was, if God is all good, right? No, no, I'm sorry. If God created all things, then who created evil? If God is all good, how could God create evil? And if God is all knowing and knows that evil exists and can change evil, why not? Because either answer either takes away the argument of omniscience, omnipresence, or, the other thing. I can't remember. But it was like kind of like one of those, which one of those guys do you want to be? Like, if God made everything, then where did evil come from? It was either created or allowed, right?
Right.
And if God is creating or allowing evil, then how is God still all good? And if the answer is that, well, God has to allow evil, then how is God all powerful? And like, it kind of is like that episode of The Office where the episode ends and they're all like sitting there pointing finger guns at each other.
Right.
It's the Batman, no, the Spider-Man meme.
Spider-Man, yeah.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the other quote that Matt Dillahunty said that really, it was something that I thought about a long time. I just couldn't put it into words, right? And it's, God sacrificed himself to serve as a loophole for worlds he made himself.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. And it was, and I discovered magical thinking in the
Right.
context of OCD. And I realized, my God, so much of the stuff that I have done, or kind of tracked with has largely been like a function of magical thinking OCD. If I do this and this and this, then that, God give me a sign for this, or I felt like the Lord is calling me to fast for 7 days, or I need to do this to feel like, so if you honestly, if there's anybody listening and you feel like trapped sometimes by those thought processes, please investigate magical thinking OCD, because what I learned is while many of us may not have clinical OCD or things like that, when you are part of a closed group and part of a cult think group, especially from childhood, you develop magical thinking tendencies. And it can be really destructive in your life. Like, you know, I there's a scripture that says, any negative thought that you have, like, cast it from you, or resist the devil and he'll flee from you, or, all these kind of axioms that we use. And I didn't realize it had become so ingrained in me that I would be like whispering a little prayers, I'd pass it, or like, God
Uh,
bless him or help me. And when you stop and you pull back from that and you realize, like, this is magical thinking.
well,
And
things like, if you had a job interview, you can't talk about it because if you do, you won't get the job.
you'll jinx it.
Even to silly things, that I can't sit at this area on the couch because if I do, the Cowboys are going to
I
lose.
was going to say, should we talk about football here?
Yeah, no, but there are all kinds. When I was young, if I didn't turn around 3 times before I turned off the light, mom and dad would die. So,
Right, right. Well,
just all kinds of crap like that that goes on in your head.
and for me too, the way a lot of that shook out, whatever, what that looked like was, there's, along with prosperity gospel, a big part of that is this belief that the tongue has power. And if there's anybody, again, if there's anybody out there that is listening and you've been part of the church system in the last 20 years or more, you're very familiar with this. At God, the Beth Moore studies about, and what's her name? The battlefield of the mind. I can't think of her name right now. I know somebody knows it. I can't think of it. But yeah, the battlefield of the mind, and the idea that as you speak it, so it shall be, as on heaven, as on earth, and the power of the tongue, and the tongue is life and death.
Joyce
And
Myers,
thank you. Good God. Thank you. Yes,
Google is my
Joyce
friend.
Myers. Yeah, exactly. Boy, that takes me back. But I would do Bible study with Joyce Myers and, Beth, whoever I just said, all the time. Beth Moore. Beth Moore was the other one. And I'd read their books and, okay, I just need to reframe my thinking, and I've got to think positive thoughts and think uplifting thoughts and speak it as though it were, enlarge your territory and the prayer of Jabez, like all of these things, all the books, all of the positive Joel Osteenisms. I did it all. I tried it all. And there was so much of that that just twisted into my head that it was hard to call things the truth, because that became conflated with, well, you're thinking negatively. The enemy's going to know your thoughts and use those against you. Don't even put that out there because the enemy can use that against you. You know what I mean? Like, this was
Yeah.
such a way of the life that I wouldn't even be able to say, hey, I'm miserable and I'm in an abusive, dangerous marriage with situations that are far beyond my pay grade, and I'm really afraid and need help. I couldn't say that. So I had to be like, well, things are challenging, but God is good. The devil is a liar. And, there's grace for those that press forward. And like, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that's how you're trained, to where you're not even really processing anymore. You're sort of just like filtering through and then coming up with the Christian algorithmic answer for this situation.
Well, that's one thing I've wanted to ask you is like, so we all know that you're smarter than me. You have like 15
Ha.
degrees. No, seriously, you are. You're very smart.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
get by.
Whatever.
I
Whatever.
don't trip over myself.
You're all right.
But that's my wife and I have talked about it in the past, and she's like, "Your sister is so smart. I just don't understand how she can be caught up in that." And I'd be like, "Well, it's you grow up, you're indoctrinated. It's a cult. You when your parents sit there every day and tell you something. I mean, they tell you the Cowboys are the greatest team on earth, and they're always the greatest team on earth. But when you're little and your parents tell you something that it's true, and especially something that is such a that involves eternity, I mean, When I was young, I didn't think I was going to make it past 18. Not that I was going to die in a car crash or a plane crash or anything, but the world's going to end,
The
which
world is going to
affected the
end.
way that I thought about the rest of my life, the way that I prepared for the rest of my life, unfortunately. There were
Well,
things I probably would have done a lot different, but your parents tell you the world's going to end, then what's really the use of studying? What's really the use of preparing for anything like that? But
absolutely.
I, what was my point? I don't remember.
Absolutely. And to that end too, I thought the same thing. And I remember being in church services as a kid crying because I'm like, I don't want the rapture to happen before I have a chance
Yeah.
to live.
Yeah, and that's you would see how happy these people were that the world was going to end, and you're
Right.
like, well, yeah, you're happy, you're old, and they're probably like 40 something, they were old. But I was like, you've lived your life, man. You've got to have kids, you've got to have sex, you got to drink,
Right.
you got to
See
explore
somewhere
and
outside of this
travel.
town.
You're
Right.
right. I'm not going to get to do that.
Well,
My
and the
world's going to
thing,
be over, and everybody's going to be happy. But you know what? That was my point. My question was from the time I was really young, even when going to church and things like that, it would give me the heebie-jeebies, for lack of a better word. And when there were some times when everybody would be at the house or over at somebody's house and everybody be gathered around and singing and singing and worshiping. And I don't know if you noticed, I always was like gone.
yeah.
I took off because to quote what my kids would say, it was cringy to me,
Right. Right.
and it didn't feel real. It didn't feel genuine. I have had more, as we were talking about before, more real feelings. I actually was at a Head in the Heart concert at Red Rocks and cried, like tears streaming down my face, more
Right.
than anything I've ever felt at a church. And it wasn't it wasn't anything that I ingested making me like that. It was the music, it was the place, and the song brought back feelings of a friend of mine who passed away.
Yeah.
And it just I had more of an honest feeling there, more of a connection with people I didn't even know, me and my wife, with all these thousands of people at Red Rocks, than I ever had at a church.
But
Everything
that's
there
what we're
felt just
meant to
so
feel.
fake. People were there not because they wanted to be at church,
Right.
it was because they didn't want to go to hell, or because they had such trauma in their life previously that they had to do a 180. They had to go totally the other direction. And just like AA, where you have to look to, this higher power, you need something when you're in that situation to look up to guide you. And unfortunately, people do need that. But I think religion and preachers and these narcissist kind of people, these money hungry bastards,
Right.
are taking advantage of these people that are in these dire situations. And it's
Well,
really sad
to that,
from our perspective, sorry, but from our
no, you're so fine.
perspective, we have seen behind the altar. And I think it's something that both of us just decided, this isn't as real as we thought it was, and people are being used for
Right.
other people's gain, and we don't want to be a part of that anymore.
Right.
So,
No,
anyway,
that's very well said and very true. And I think to a big point of what you're saying, you don't know you're in a cult while you're in a cult, you know?
you don't know
It's
you're in a bad relationship until you're
until
out of
you're
a bad
not.
relationship.
Right. Or, it's sort of like, in that this is such a silly example, but when you leave your house, like you go for vacation or you go away for the weekend or something, and you come back and you're like, ah, it's our house smell.
Right.
And when you live in your house, you don't smell your house really, hopefully. Excuse me. But when you come back, you smell your house smell. The things that we're surrounded in, we tend not to be as aware of. I think honestly, and again, I'm not trying to malign our parents for this for this particular thing, but
We'll
just in the
malign them
context
about
of being
other stuff.
right, in the context of being an adult now and holding that responsibility of my children with such gravity, um, I feel that it's really cruel to take a child who's so fresh into this world and impress upon them such rigid forms of belief or such rigid ideas about things and neuter their ability to question safely because they won't know any different. I try to remember that now and looking at compassion with people who, in my opinion, are currently caught up in cultish thinking, because that thinking doesn't just have to be about religion, but they're caught up in that. And it's like somebody who's selling Amway or Mary Kay, like they don't
Right.
get it until they're out of it. And then they're like,
Well,
oh, maybe that wasn't the best idea.
I heard a good term somebody say, I forget who, I'll remember later, but in Christianity, when you're really in it, you have all the confidence in the world and none of the curiosity.
Well, and
You
that
have
to
all the
me,
confidence that you're right and none of the curiosity to question anything.
right. And I think the final, like, that leads me to my next point, sort of my final answer, as it were. So after all of those things had happened, I'd left my marriage, he'd passed away. I was trying to put myself, my thoughts, my ideas back together. I was even trying to figure out, like, what color do I like? I don't know. What color furniture do I want? I have no idea. I've got no experience with making any decisions or thoughts or whatever for myself. And so, sort of like during that process and just thinking, next years or so that went by, I remarried and found myself expecting a very much of a surprise baby. And
Fertile Myrtle.
I know, right? Those last two surprises were really surprises. But I'm thrilled that they're here. But yeah, they were definitely surprises. So my third baby was
We could have been
diagnosed.
done. We could
I
have been
know,
so
dude. I
done.
I told him that today. I was like, we could have been in a Jeep somewhere on a beach, but no, it's great. It's fun. My third baby was diagnosed with Down syndrome when I was not too far along, and right before that, in full disclosure to the world, I was pregnant when I got married for the second time, and
You sinner.
I
You
know, I know,
Jezebel.
I
Scarlet
know.
letter.
Well, here's the context. I got knocked up by my high school boyfriend at age 40. So I
Well,
told you I was a late bloomer.
I knocked up my college girlfriend, so
Yeah,
hey.
there you go. And I mean, at this point, I had already been a widow, I'd already been a widow, a single mother, and almost divorcee. Like, I had not had an easy relationship trajectory. And my parents, of all people, knew this. And here I am back with this man who was, my first love, and just truly like the sweetest man. I told someone today, like, he, honest to God, would crawl through hell just to bring me a cool drink if I ask him. He's just the most precious person.
It would just take him a minute. He would do
It
it
would
though.
take him a minute, but he'd get there, and with a smile. And so here I am, like, starting my life. My kids, my older kids, love this guy. Our families have known each other because we dated when we were younger, and it's just a very sweet story. And at our rehearsal dinner, we let them know, "Hey, surprise, we thought we were all done having kids in the family, but surprise, here I'm having another one."
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I remember, I think you had a party when you were 18, and I
We
remember.
don't need to talk about any
Oh, never
parties.
mind. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
We can save them for no. Anyway, and it's not like we were babies. Like, we were both fully employed. I owned a home. Like, I had kids, going to school, and I was a career person, and so was he. And like, we were 40, or almost nearby, whatever. Their response, you would have thought that, I don't know, you would have thought that I had just set fire to a team of puppies or something. It was very eye-opening because, like, I wasn't a teenager sitting there putting obstacles in my path or having to face a lot of challenges. Like, we were financially solvent, mature adults who had loved each other for decades and had reconnected and found each other. And now we're having not only a wedding and a place of healing, and my children that had been so traumatized are welcoming him into our family, but now we have a beautiful baby on top of that. And that wasn't how they viewed the situation. And if you remember, you were thinking about, we might have to ask you to step in and officiate our ceremony, because
Yeah,
it
that
was
would have
like,
been really weird. Like,
shortly after that, we found out that our boy was diagnosed with Down syndrome and would have some heart challenges and other things. And here was the difference: the side of the family that wasn't in the cult, came to me with love and with support and with, he's going to be amazing and we're here to help support you guys and we can't wait to welcome him. And the other side of the family came from the perspective of, this is something that God needs to heal and solve and fix. And it hit me real different. I'll just leave it there and say, special needs child, you understand that twist of the knife. And, even still in language that's put forward, it's, well, we're praying for his total restoration. And I'm like,
What
he's
the
probably the most restored soul there
well,
is.
yeah, he's
Like,
got the happiest life, man.
I know.
You
And
know,
he's
he
truly
doesn't
like,
he doesn't care. He wants to watch his videos and eat his fruit, and he's the
listen to
happiest
music.
dude, you know? Wow, listen to music. He's always happy to see me if you've had a
Mm-hmm.
shit day and you walk in and you see him. You
Yep.
can't be sad anymore. And
No,
he
you
gives you a
can't.
hug and yeah, it's just he's the
He's the
best.
best. He
My
truly
kids
is.
my kids love him. The other day, he called me like 50 times. He FaceTimed me like 50 times in a row.
Sorry about
And my
that.
sons were sitting here laughing their ass off. It was great. It was so funny.
But
He's awesome
yeah,
though,
and just
man, you know?
through that whole experience and and looking at my child and thinking there are people that would say that because he will never be able to comprehend the complexities of religion
Oh,
that
thank God.
and I'm like
I don't think it's
there
that
is no,
complex, but
you can't certain sometimes you just have certain experiences in life that lead you to a place of recognizing anything that's born out of pure love can't be, you can't punish that, and there can't be a hell. And like, by the same token, as I healed and as I grew out from abuse and into really like being loved, it hit me that you how could you punish your child for eternity?
right.
Like, how could I look at my kid that at 2 drew on my walls in Sharpie and be like, "You're punished for
That's it.
eternity."
That's it. You made one mistake. You fucked up. That's it.
Like,
Well,
and in the grand scheme of things, aren't even the oldest among us in comparison to an eternal God. Like, we're all cosmic babies. So,
yeah,
and furthermore, we're
supposedly.
doing the stuff that we're programmed to kind of do and explore and
Right.
learn.
Yeah,
So,
we're totally supposed to, our brain is made to ask questions and figure shit out and explore. I mean, we went to the
right,
moon for gosh sakes. Oh,
right.
but you'd mentioned the way that mom and dad reacted, when you
Yeah,
told them you're having another baby. Well, when our first son was born, and
yeah.
my wife and I, we hadn't had a church wedding, but we were married, legally married. And so we didn't have a bastard. We were totally legally married.
Mm-hmm.
When I told mom and dad that we were having a baby, and my wife had called her parents and told them, and it was the typical what you would expect. Everybody was happy, everybody was excited. Her parents loved me,
Yeah.
her dad's like a dad to me. I love him to death. He's the greatest guy in the world. But that she had that experience, and I was able to live that experience with her. We told my parents. My mom and dad weren't very happy, and my mom told my wife that our son was going to go to hell because he was a bastard, because we had him out of wedlock. So that was
Wow.
awesome. And also, I don't know, we were looking back because we recently moved, and as we're moving, we're looking back, looking through stuff and come across our wedding pictures. And yeah, I'm old enough to have pictures in a book. People, leave me
Right.
alone. But my parents in the pictures at our wedding, they look, and it was a small wedding. It wasn't anything big. We paid for it ourselves. My parents didn't want to have anything to do with it. But they they look like people from the 1800s. They're not smiling,
Yeah.
They're just standing there all stoic faced and stuff. And it's supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I'm getting married and having a baby, and I'm 25. I thought I was old. I'm scared to death. I felt like I had no support. In fact, I had asked mom to go with me to buy my suit for the wedding, and she didn't go. She wouldn't go with me. It's just one of
God,
the
that I'm
the
sorry.
like one of the couple of times in my life where you think you can go to your parent and you think
Yeah.
if I tell them this thing, they're gonna understand, and they understand me. They'll be by my side. They'll and they didn't. And it sucks. But anyway, enough about that. I think
That
we've
does
talked like
suck.
now for an hour or two. It feels
Probably
like.
so. But yeah, so just to
Yeah.
wrap it up, that was, that was my experience. And I will say, in closing, the coolest thing for me was that, there was a time of deconstruction, a little bit of like unprocessing, like almost a feeling of looking into the void and being like, whoa, everything is big. Because, if I don't know where I go after I die, then I have to think about that. Like, where do I go and what does happen and why am I here? And ironically, it led me into such, it's going to sound weird, but what it felt like was honestly it's such a romance with life. Like, I would look at the stars and look at the trees and I'd be like, we come from stardust,
Yeah,
like
and
it's magical. And
I don't want to live a good life because I have a carrot in front of me or because I have a stick behind me.
right,
You know, you should live life and be a good person and have morals and want to treat people right because we're all on this planet, this fucking rock flying through space together.
and
You're only here
yes,
for a short period of time. I mean, it's beautiful here. If you don't think it's beautiful, get a puppy dog.
right,
And a puppy dog is life because they're happy, they make you happy, they're great, but they're also a pain in the ass. They're going to have to clean up their shit and you're going to have to feed
right,
them. But just enjoy life, even the bad things, and not
right.
because that there's some heaven out there because you're trying to please some God who made you to please him and has all these rules. Just because life is great, man. Like, go
Yeah.
fishing, have a beer, whatever floats your boat.
Sleep in on a
But
Sunday or
just
don't,
enjoy it.
you know?
Just
Yeah, no, for
enjoy the
sure.
short time you have here and not because you're trying to impress somebody and not because, you're trying to make your family happy. Do what's right for you, you know?
Right. Yeah, that was my experience too. And it was amazing in waves, like the anxiety will release sometimes. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, it's okay. I'm not going to get punished because I did this thing. Like, I'm not going to lose out on this or that opportunity because I'm being punished because I did or didn't do this or that thing. Like, it's just life. Good things happen, bad things happen. And this sense of community, like, truly looking at other people who I didn't realize how judgmental I was. And that's maybe something we talk about next time. But, I just realized, like you said, we're all here together. We're all part of the same, we're all part of the same gang.
My speaking of that, I just want to touch on that real quick. My wife pointed out because she came from a totally different, and her family is cool as shit, and you have drinks at Christmas time, and they're normal freaking people, and they're really nice. And guess what? They don't go to church, but they're like the nicest people I know. But what was I gonna say?
Judgment.
Yeah, she pointed out to me when we were very young into our relationship, when we got to know each other, where she could tell me this, she's like, your family seems really judgmental. She didn't use those words exactly, but pointed out to me that, and I'm like, yeah, it is kind of embarrassing and I think that rubbed off on me in a really bad way, where actually I think it rubbed off in the way that I feel like everybody's judging me because of the people
Right.
I were around were always judging people. So
Right. Yeah.
it's a very bad environment. Not only because it can make you one of those kind of people, but it can also totally just ruin your confidence in yourself because if they're talking about those people behind their back and they're supposed to be their friends
Yeah.
and they're supposed to be not only their friends but their preacher, their guidance through this life, their passageway to God, then they're making fun of them behind their back like
Right.
um, yeah, it just kind of it it fucks with you for a long time. So
It really does. It really does. I'm glad to be out of it. And, another time I'd like to maybe share about the differences I see in raising children in that world versus raising my younger two completely out of it. And, there's a lot of room for growth, but um, I will say this in our final my final statement. I guess the thing too that I really learned is truth is never afraid of questions. Ever. It's just not, it's the nature of truth to want to be questioned, to want to be found, and to want to be uncovered. And so anything that is telling you that truth is repellent of investigation or repellent of transparency or questions, maybe give that a second thought. That's all
that,
I have to say.
that's really good. I like that.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah, don't be afraid. Question everything.
Yeah, for
Don't
sure.
trust a man.
Maybe we just go back to the 60s.
All right.
Awesome. Well, we'll chat again soon. Thanks for
All right.
listening.
Later.
Later.